Do you understand the gravity of this situation? This badge does not give you the right to disrespect this court.
The courtroom went deathly silent. So silent you could hear a pin drop. Just seconds earlier, Judge Lawrence Calloway, a man feared across Cook County for his iron fist and cruel tongue, had laughed openly in the face of an elderly black woman standing alone before him. He didn't just dismiss her words. He mocked her tears. He questioned her worth as a mother. And he did it loudly, confidently, as if humiliation itself were part of the sentence. To Calloway, she was nothing special, just another poor, elderly black woman without a lawyer. Another fragile statistic he could crush from the safety of his bench before lunch. He leaned back in his high-backed chair, adjusted his robe, and smirked. His gavel rested in his hand like a loaded weapon. He enjoyed this part, the moment when power reminded weakness who was in charge. At the defense table stood Eleanor Vance, 63 years old, dressed in a modest gray skirt suit and a small church hat with a single faded flower on the brim. Her hands shook as she clutched papers she barely understood. She had no attorney beside her, no family next to her, just silence and fear. She tried to speak again. "Your Honor, I just want to explain." Calloway cut her off with a laugh. "Oh, I've heard enough," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "I'm tired of excuses." The deputies along the wall stared straight ahead. The court clerk avoided eye contact. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, ready to record another line of cruelty for the record. Eleanor swallowed hard. Her voice trembled. "I didn't destroy anything. I just want to keep my home." That was when Calloway leaned forward and smiled. He raised his gavel slowly, savoring the moment. He was about to ruin her life, and he knew it. But what Judge Calloway didn't see, what he never imagined, was the woman standing quietly in the shadows of the very last row. She wore a sharp navy suit, perfectly pressed. Perfect posture. A leather briefcase rested at her feet. Large sunglasses concealed her eyes, but her stillness carried weight. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't confused. She was waiting. She wasn't there to comfort the old woman. She was there to witness something. As Calloway lifted the gavel higher, preparing to bring it down, the woman in the back slowly removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were calm, focused, unafraid. And when she stood up, the entire courtroom felt it. Because arrogance had just made its first mistake. And it was about to pay for it in front of everyone. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It sat in the mailbox of a small, well-kept bungalow on the outskirts of Chicago, stiff, official, and heavy with consequences. Eleanor Vance held it in trembling hands, already sensing that whatever was inside would change her life. For 63 years, Eleanor had lived quietly, not invisibly, just without noise. She was a retired nurse who had spent 4 decades in hospital corridors, changing bedpans, checking IV lines, and holding the hands of strangers as they took their final breaths. She never made headlines. She never demanded recognition. She believed that if you worked hard, kept your head down, and treated people with decency, the world would eventually do the same for you. She was wrong. Eleanor raised her only daughter, Sophia, on a single income after her husband passed away. She worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and learned how to stretch a dollar until it begged for mercy. Every paycheck went toward rent, groceries, school supplies, and later, tuition. The day Sophia graduated from law school, Eleanor cried harder than she ever had at a funeral. Not from sadness, but from relief. from knowing every sacrifice had meant something. That house, the modest bungalow, was proof of a lifetime of discipline. It was where her husband planted rose bushes along the fence line before cancer took him, where Eleanor spent quiet mornings tending a small garden that still bloomed, even when arthritis made bending painful. So, when Oakwood Estates LLC bought the empty lot next door, Eleanor assumed it would be simple. They would build, she would keep her roses. Life would go on. Instead, the letters started coming. The developer claimed Eleanor's garage crossed onto their property by 6 inches. 6 inches, barely the width of a hand. Eleanor expected a conversation. A knock on the door. A chance to resolve it like neighbors. They sent lawyers instead. The language was dense. The deadlines unforgiving. And when Eleanor misunderstood one filing requirement, Oakwood's attorneys didn't ask for clarification. They escalated. They filed for summary judgment. Then they accused her of ignoring a court notice she never received. When surveyors reported damaged stakes, Eleanor swore she had never seen the accusation sharpened. What began as a minor civil dispute quietly transformed into something far more dangerous, a criminal charge. And now, standing alone in Judge Calloway's courtroom, Eleanor finally understood the truth. This wasn't about 6 inches of land. It never was. It was about power. And the system had already decided which side she was on. Judge Lawrence Calloway didn't see people. He saw cases. And cases, to him, were nothing more than numbers to be cleared before lunch. From the back row of courtroom 4B, Eleanor watched him work his way through the docket with mechanical cruelty. Defendants stepped forward one by one, and Calloway disposed of them with cold efficiency. He didn't listen. He didn't ask questions to understand. He asked questions to dominate. A young man with a nervous stutter struggled to answer. Calloway smirked and leaned forward. "Spit it out," he said. "We don't have all day." A young woman in worn clothing tried to explain why she missed a payment. Calloway glanced at her outfit and made a joke about appropriate courtroom attire. The lawyers in the front row laughed. The woman shrank. This wasn't justice. It was theater, and Calloway was drunk on applause. When Eleanor's case number was finally called, her stomach dropped, as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. She stood slowly, knees trembling, and walked toward the defense table. Each step echoed too loudly on the linoleum floor, as if the room itself were announcing her vulnerability. She stood alone. No attorney, no advocate, no shield. Judge Calloway didn't acknowledge her at first. He shuffled papers deliberately, took a slow sip of coffee, let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. It was a calculated pause, a reminder that time belonged to him, not her. Finally, he looked up over his reading glasses. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice flat and impatient. "You are charged with criminal mischief in the 4th degree and contempt of court." Eleanor swallowed. "Your Honor, I didn't destroy anything. I swear, I never saw those stakes. Save it." Calloway cut in, waving his hand as if brushing away dust. "The affidavit from the developer is clear. You interfered with a lawful survey. You failed to appear at a scheduled hearing. You are wasting this court's time. I never received notice for that hearing." Eleanor said softly, "I'm not familiar with the procedures. I'm a retired nurse. I just want to explain." Calloway leaned back and lifted a grainy photograph from the file. It showed Eleanor's yard slightly overgrown, uneven in places where arthritis had slowed her. He studied it, then looked back at her. "Frankly," he said, "this doesn't look like a property you're capable of maintaining. Maybe you should consider selling it to someone who can improve the neighborhood." A ripple of laughter came from the front row where Oakwood's attorneys sat. Polished shoes crossed. Smirks firmly in place. Eleanor felt heat rise to her face. "I've lived there 40 years," she said, her voice barely steady. "I raised my daughter there. I keep it clean. I just didn't see the stakes in the grass." Calloway's eyes hardened. "Ignorance of the law is not an excuse," he said coldly. "And neither is pretending not to see what's right in front of you." In the back row, unseen by Eleanor, a woman in a navy suit stopped writing. Her pen hovered above the page, and for the first time that morning, Judge Calloway's cruelty had an audience that wasn't laughing. Eleanor tried to steady her breathing. She had faced death before in hospital rooms filled with beeping machines and whispered prayers. But this was different. This wasn't a moment of nature taking its course. This was a man choosing cruelty because he could. "Your Honor," Eleanor said carefully, "they're trying to take 5 feet of my yard. That's where my husband planted rose bushes before he passed away." Judge Calloway sighed loudly, making sure the microphone picked it up. "Oh, here we go," he said, rolling his eyes for the court reporter to record. "The dead husband defense." A few quiet chuckles rippled from the front row. Eleanor blinked. "They're not dead," she said. "The roses. Sentiment doesn't override property statutes." Calloway snapped. "You are obstructing a multi-million-dollar development over some flowers." "They're not just flowers," Eleanor replied, finding a thread of strength. "And neither is my dignity." That word landed wrong. Calloway leaned forward slowly, his face tightening. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he had already decided was beneath him. "Your dignity," he scoffed. "You are standing in my courtroom charged with a crime, wasting taxpayer money because you can't follow simple instructions, and you want to lecture me about dignity." Eleanor's hands trembled. Tears welled despite her effort to hold them back. "I worked for 40 years, she said softly. "I never took a handout. I paid my taxes. I did everything right." Calloway muttered, loud enough for the microphone. "So you claim—" He looked her over again slowly, deliberately, and shook his head. "But I know the type," he added. "People who think because they're old, or because they come from a certain background, the rules don't apply." The implication hung heavy in the air. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. Eleanor felt something break inside her, not fear, but disbelief. She had lived her entire life believing the law existed to protect people like her. Calloway picked up his pen. "I am finding you guilty on all counts," he announced. "Already writing. Maximum fine. And 30 days in county jail for contempt of court." The words didn't register at first. "Jail," Eleanor whispered. "Your Honor? Please. I have heart medication. I have a dog at home. Calloway didn't look up. "Maybe you should have considered that before deciding to become a criminal," he said flatly. "Bailiff, take her into custody." The bailiff stepped forward, uncomfortable but obedient. Handcuffs dangling heavily at his side. Eleanor's composure collapsed. She began to cry quiet. Broken sounds she tried to stifle. "Please," she said. "I need to call my daughter." Calloway laughed. "And who is she?" he sneered. "Some welfare queen who's going to come in here screaming at me. If she's anything like you, she's probably late for something right now." That was the moment the courtroom changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively, because in the very back row, the woman in the navy suit closed her notebook and stood up, The sound of the courtroom door closing echoed like a gunshot. Every head turned. From the very last row, the woman in the navy suit stepped forward into the aisle. She moved calmly, deliberately, as if she had all the time in the world. Her heels struck the floor with quiet authority. Each step measured, controlled. She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, focused, unafraid. Judge Calloway squinted. "Sit down," he barked, slamming the gavel. "This court is not open to commentary. Bailiff, remove that woman immediately." The bailiff hesitated, then moved toward her. But the woman didn't stop walking. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a small leather credentials wallet, and flipped it open with one smooth motion. A gold badge caught the overhead lights, flashing across the courtroom. "Federal prosecutor," she said clearly. "Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division." The bailiff froze mid-step. He looked at the badge, then at her face, then back at the judge. He took a step back. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Calloway's face darkened. "I don't care if you're the President of the United States," he snapped. "This is my courtroom. You are disrupting a sentencing." The woman reached the gate, opened it herself, and stepped through an act so casual, so confident, it sucked the air out of the room. She walked directly to Eleanor and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Eleanor looked up through tears, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Sophia." Sophia leaned down and whispered, "It's okay. Mama, I'm here now." She straightened and turned toward the bench. "You are not sentencing anyone today. Judge Calloway," Sophia said calmly, "what you are doing right now is violating judicial conduct on the record." Calloway stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly behind him. "I am holding you in contempt," he shouted. "I will have you removed. I will have you disbarred." Sophia didn't raise her voice. She reached into her briefcase and placed a thick file on the defense table. The sound of it hitting the wood was final. "My name is Sophia Vance," she said, "Deputy Chief of the Federal Corruption and Civil Rights Task Force." The room went silent. Even the lawyers for Oakwood Estates stopped smiling. "For the past 6 months," Sophia continued, her voice steady and carrying, "my office has been investigating a pattern of predatory sentencing in Cook County, specifically cases involving low-income and minority homeowners in districts targeted for private development." She looked directly at Calloway. "Today," she said, "you attempted to run that same scheme on my mother." Calloway's lips parted, but no sound came out. Sophia took one step closer to the bench. "You assumed she was weak," she said. "You assumed she was alone." Her eyes hardened. "That was your mistake." Because for the first time in that courtroom, Judge Lawrence Calloway was no longer the most powerful person in the room, and he knew it. For the first time that morning, Judge Lawrence Calloway didn't look bored. He looked alert. "This is outrageous," he snapped, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "You're biased. This woman is your mother. You have no standing here." Sophia didn't flinch. "Yes," she said evenly. "She is my mother." She turned slightly, making sure her voice carried to every corner of the room. "And you called her a criminal. You mocked her tears. You implied she raised a welfare queen. You assumed she was weak because she stood here alone." Sophia paused, then added quietly, "You assumed wrong." She glanced toward the court reporter. "Are you recording all of this?" The reporter nodded, eyes wide. "Good." Sophia said, Because I am formally filing a motion for recusal based on demonstrated personal bias and abuse of judicial authority. Calloway slammed his hand on the bench. You don't get to hijack my courtroom. Sophia opened the file. No, she said calmly. I get to expose it. She removed a document and placed it on the table, turning it so the gallery could see. A shell company. She continued. Apex Consulting Group. Registered offshore. She flipped the page. Monthly deposits. $15,000 each. A murmur rippled through the room. Sophia raised her eyes to Calloway. Judge Calloway, can you explain why you are the sole authorized signatory on this account? Calloway's face tightened. This is irrelevant. Is it? Sophia asked. She pulled out another document. These deposits originate from Oakwood Estates LLC, the same developer whose attorneys are seated in this courtroom right now. All eyes snapped to the front row. One of the Oakwood lawyers stiffened. Another began typing furiously on his phone. Fingers shaking. Sophia didn't raise her voice. But authority filled it. Sit down, she said. They did. Sophia continued, pacing slowly now. For 3 years, Judge Calloway has presided over 42 property disputes involving Oakwood Estates. In every single case, the homeowner was elderly, low income, or a racial minority. She held up a chart, and in every single case, Judge Calloway ruled against the homeowner, issuing excessive fines, forced sales, or jail time for contempt. She looked back at Eleanor, just like he tried to do today. Calloway's jaw clenched. Coincidence, he said sharply. You can't prove intent. Sophia reached into her pocket and held up a small USB drive. You're right, she said, which is why we didn't stop at bank records. The room seemed to lean toward her. This drive contains recorded phone calls. Sophia continued. Calls made from your private number. Calls where you discuss pressuring homeowners into selling. Calls where you refer to them as easy targets. Distraback, Matavagenso. Eleanor's breath caught. Sophia's voice hardened. In one of those calls, she said, staring directly at Calloway, you laughed about scaring my mother into selling her home before lunch. A sharp gasp cut through the courtroom. Calloway's color drained. His hands gripped the bench so tightly his knuckles went white. You didn't just judge her, Sophia said quietly. You hunted her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Because everyone in that room understood something now. This wasn't about one cruel judge having a bad day. It was about a system and the person who thought he controlled it finally being dragged into the light. And then Sophia glanced at her watch and said the words that made Judge Calloway's blood run cold. They're here. The double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The sound was sharp, final, like reality slamming into arrogance. 6 men and women in dark windbreakers stepped inside with disciplined precision. Yellow letters flashed across their chests, FBI. You. Is tech. Marshals. The air in the room changed instantly the way it does when authority stops pretending. Conversations died mid-breath. At their head walked Special Agent David Ross. Broad-shouldered. Expression carved from stone. In his hand was a folded warrant. Lawrence Calloway, Ross called out, his voice cutting through the room without effort. Calloway stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor. Now, just a minute, Calloway shouted. This is highly irregular. I am a sitting judge. You are under arrest. Ross continued calmly, stepping through the gate without asking permission. Warrant number 899B2. Charges include racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, and multiple counts of judicial misconduct. The words hit like hammer blows. 2 agents moved toward the bench. "Step down," one of them said. "He didn't say, Your Honor. He didn't say, Judge. Just step down." Calloway looked around wildly at the bailiff, at the clerk, at the lawyers who had laughed with him minutes earlier. No one moved to help him. No one met his eyes. "This is a setup," Calloway barked. "A political hit job. You can't do this in my courtroom." Ross didn't react. "This isn't your courtroom anymore," he replied. Calloway backed away from the bench as agents closed in. His hand brushed the gavel, the symbol of power he had used to ruin lives, but this time it didn't protect him. "I can make a deal," Calloway blurted out, panic breaking through his voice. "I can give you names. Developers. City council members. Henderson." At the prosecution table, Oakwood's attorneys gasped. "Objection," one of them shouted reflexively, standing halfway out of his chair before realizing how meaningless the words sounded now. Sophia didn't even look at him. "We don't need your help, Lawrence," she said coolly. "We already have everything." The agent spun Calloway around and pressed him against the wooden paneling of the bench, the very surface he had leaned over while mocking Eleanor just minutes earlier. Handcuffs snapped shut. Click, click. The sound echoed through the room. As they pulled him forward, one agent reached up and stripped the black robe from Calloway's shoulders. It slid off easily, revealing a wrinkled, sweat-soaked dress shirt underneath. The illusion vanished. The mighty judge was just a man. The doors opened again, and this time, it wasn't law enforcement. It was the press. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Reporters shouted questions over one another as microphones surged forward. "Judge Calloway, did you take bribes? Is it true you targeted minority homeowners, Mrs. Vance? Mrs. Vance?" "Over here." Calloway tried to shield his face, but there was nowhere to hide. As agents marched him down the aisle, Sophia turned calmly toward the front row. "Agent Ross," she said evenly, pointing at the Oakwood attorneys frozen in their seats. "Don't forget the bagmen." Ross nodded once. "Gentlemen," he said to the lawyers, "stand up. Hands where I can see them." They obeyed, and as the courtroom erupted into stunned chaos, Eleanor stood quietly at the defense table, no longer shaking, no longer alone. For the first time that day, justice wasn't theoretical. It was wearing handcuffs. Eleanor thought it was over. Standing in that courtroom, watching Judge Calloway led away in handcuffs, she believed just for a moment that justice worked the way it was supposed to. That when the truth came out, the story would end. She was wrong. Because monsters don't disappear when you expose them. They retaliate. 48 hours later, Judge Lawrence Calloway made bail. $500,000 posted by a friend of the court whose name was hidden behind a shell corporation. He walked out of county jail not with his head down, but with his chin lifted, wearing a fresh suit delivered straight to his cell. And standing beside him on the courthouse steps was Marcus Thorne. In Chicago legal circles, Thorne wasn't just a defense attorney. He was a weapon. They called him the Shark of State Street, a man who didn't defend clients so much as devour their accusers. The moment Thorne opened his mouth, the narrative shifted. "This is not a prosecution," he declared to the waiting cameras, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "This is a political assassination. My client is a decorated public servant, targeted by a rogue federal agent, abusing her authority to settle a personal family dispute." He turned slightly, just enough to gesture toward Sophia. "A daughter's revenge." By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Fed daughter targets judge. Deep state vendetta in Cook County. Property dispute turns political witch hunt. They didn't attack the evidence. They attacked the women. Reporters camped outside Eleanor's home, shouting questions through her windows. Someone dug up a noise complaint filed against her dog 20 years earlier and spun it into a story about chronic neighborhood disturbances. Another outlet found a missed credit card payment from the 1,990 seconds and framed it as proof Eleanor was financially unstable. The message was clear. This is your fault. Sophia wasn't spared either. Talk radio hosts called her unhinged. Commentators accused her of weaponizing her badge. Online forums dissected her career, suggesting she had always been too aggressive, too ambitious, too emotional. Then came the intimidation. It started with phone calls 3 a.m. Dead silence on the line. Then Eleanor's car tires were slashed in her driveway. And finally, on a cold, rainy night, a brick smashed through Eleanor's living room window, glass exploding across the rug where her grandson usually played. Wrapped around the brick was a single note: "Snitches get buried." Eleanor sat on her couch, shaking, clutching a blanket around her shoulders as rain blew through the broken window. "Maybe we should stop," she whispered. "He's too powerful. He knows everyone." Sophia stood near the window, staring out at the dark street where a private security car now idled. Her jaw tightened. "No, Mama," she said quietly. "That's exactly why we can't." She turned, eyes burning with resolve. "If we back down now, he wins. And if he wins, he comes back stronger." Sophia's voice dropped, steady and dangerous. "We're not running anymore." She took a breath. "We're going to trial." 3 months later, the trial began in federal court. The Dirksen Federal Building loomed over downtown Chicago like a fortress cold stone. Sealed windows, and a weight that pressed down on everyone who walked through its doors. This wasn't Cook County anymore. This was where stories either died or became history. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every bench. Law students lined the walls. And scattered among them were faces Eleanor recognized: elderly homeowners, veterans, widows, people who had once stood alone in Judge Calloway's courtroom and lost everything. At the defense table sat Lawrence Calloway. He looked different now. Quieter, more contained. His hair neatly combed. His suit perfectly tailored. He leaned close to Marcus Thorne, whispering, smiling faintly, as if this were all an inconvenience, not the reckoning of a lifetime. Thorne stood when the trial opened, confidence radiating from him. "This case," he told the jury, pacing slowly, "is not about corruption. It's about abuse of power." He turned and pointed subtly, carefully toward Sophia, a federal prosecutor who crossed ethical lines to protect her own mother. The words hung in the air. Thorne was careful. He didn't deny the bank records. He reframed them. He didn't deny the recordings. He questioned intent. "These so-called bribes," he said smoothly, "they were consulting fees. A judge with decades of experience has a right to write, to consult, to earn." Some jurors nodded. Doubt crept in. When the prosecution presented spreadsheets and timelines, the defense called them complex but circumstantial. When agents testified, Thorne painted them as overzealous. Then Eleanor was called to the stand. She sat small in the witness chair, hands folded in her lap, church hat resting carefully on her knees. She told the truth about the roses, the letters, the fear. Thorne approached slowly. Voice gentle. You were upset. Mrs. Vance, he said. You felt helpless. Yes. Eleanor admitted. And you called your daughter. Thorne continued. A powerful federal prosecutor. I asked for help, Eleanor said softly. Thorne's tone snapped hard. You asked her to destroy the judge who ruled against you? Gasps rippled through the room. Objection, the prosecutor shouted. Sustained, the judge ruled. But the damage was done. As Eleanor stepped down, tears welled in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from shame. She felt like she had become the very thing they accused her of. In the hallway, during recess, the lead prosecutor pulled Sophia aside. We're losing the room, he said quietly. Thorne has turned this into a family vendetta. If Calloway walks, he'll sue the department, and he'll be back on the bench. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment. Then she reached into her briefcase. There's one witness, she said. One person Calloway never thought would betray him. The prosecutor hesitated. If this backfires, it won't. Sophia said, her voice was calm, but final. When court resumed, Sophia stood. The prosecution calls one final witness. The gallery murmured. Sophia took a breath. We call Michael Henderson. Lawrence Calloway's head snapped up, and for the first time since his arrest, fear broke through his mask. The name hit the courtroom like a shockwave. Michael Henderson, CEO of Oakwood Estates. The man whose company stood to gain millions from every homeowner. Judge Calloway crushed. Marcus Thorne was on his feet instantly. Objection, he barked. This witness was not disclosed. This is trial by ambush. Sophia didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at Thorne. Mr. Henderson approached the prosecution late last night, she said calmly. He has waived counsel and entered into a plea agreement. His testimony is relevant. Judge Alana Brooks leaned forward, eyes sharp. She studied the room for a long second. I'll allow it, she said. Call the witness. The doors opened. Michael Henderson walked in slowly, like a man carrying his own sentence. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame, dark circles carved into his eyes. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the press. He didn't look at Calloway. He took the stand and raised his hand to be sworn in. His voice cracked as he spoke his name. Sophia approached with measured steps. Mr. Henderson. She began. What was your relationship with the defendant? Lawrence Calloway. Henderson swallowed hard. We had a business arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Sophia asked. There was a long pause. Henderson's hands trembled on the rail. I paid him, he said finally. $15,000 a month. For 3 years. The courtroom inhaled as one. And what did you receive in return? Sophia pressed. Henderson looked up then, straight at Calloway. Protection, he said. Access. Whenever Oakwood wanted to develop a block, Judge Calloway made sure any legal challenges disappeared. He issued fines. He threatened jail time. He cleared the way. Thorne shot to his feet. These were consulting fees. No. Henderson snapped, his voice stronger now. There was no consulting. There was no book deal. It was protection money. Pens flew across notepads. Jurors leaned forward. Sophia took one step closer. Why are you testifying today? Mr. Henderson, she asked. You're implicating yourself in federal crimes. Henderson's jaw tightened. Because he got greedy. Calloway stiffened. After his arrest, Henderson continued. Calloway sent word to me. He didn't ask for help. He demanded hush money. $2 million. He said if I didn't pay, he'd pin everything on me. A murmur rolled through the room. He told me he was the law, Henderson said bitterly. And I was just the wallet. Sophia nodded once. So you decided to come forward? Yes, Henderson said. Before he destroyed me, too. Thorne tried to recover, cross-examining hard. But Henderson had nothing left to lose. He detailed secret meetings, offshore transfers, laughing conversations about evicting elderly homeowners and veterans. Then he reached into his briefcase. I kept records. Henderson said quietly. He handed the bailiff a thick ledger. Every payment, every case, every favor. The book landed on the evidence table with a dull, final thud. Calloway stared at it, color draining from his face. The man who once ruled from the bench now looked small, trapped by his own partner, undone by his own greed. And everyone in that courtroom knew. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a conviction waiting to happen. The jury deliberated for 3 long days. For Eleanor Vance, those 72 hours felt heavier than the 40 years she had spent working double shifts in hospital wards. She sat on a hard bench in the federal courthouse hallway, knitting a scarf she didn't need, her eyes never leaving the heavy oak doors of the jury room. Every time those doors opened, her heart stopped. Sophia didn't sit. She paced, back and forth, over and over. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from Washington. But she barely noticed. For the first time in her career, she wasn't thinking like a prosecutor. She was thinking like a daughter. On the 3rd afternoon, the buzzer sounded 2 sharp tones. A verdict had been reached. The courtroom filled in minutes. The air was thick with anticipation and stale coffee. Judge Alana Brooks took the bench, her expression unreadable. Mr. Foreman, she said evenly. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. He was a middle-aged mechanic with rough hands and tired eyes. He didn't look at the defense table. We have, Your Honor. Lawrence Calloway rose slowly, smoothing his tie with trembling fingers. The confidence was gone now, replaced by the hollow look of a man who knew his mask had failed. On count 1, the foreman began, voice steadying as he spoke. Racketeering under the RICO Act. We find the defendant, Lawrence Calloway, guilty. A gasp swept through the courtroom. Calloway flinched as if struck. On count 2, wire fraud, guilty. His shoulders sagged. On counts 3 through 20, conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, guilty. Each word landed like a nail in a coffin. 22 counts. A clean sweep. Calloway's knees buckled. He collapsed back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing in silent disbelief. Marcus Thorne closed his file slowly, the way a man does when he knows there is nothing left to argue. But the verdict was only the label. The punishment was still coming. 4 days later, Calloway stood before Judge Brooks again for sentencing. This time, he looked smaller, older, his shoulders hunched, his hands shaking as he gripped the podium. Your Honor, he rasped, tears streaking down his face. I am 65 years old. I have high blood pressure. A prison sentence would be a death sentence. He glanced toward Eleanor in the gallery, searching for sympathy. I served this county for 30 years, he pleaded. I made mistakes, but I am not a monster. Judge Brooks let the silence stretch. Then she leaned forward. Mr. Calloway, she said calmly, I have reviewed the transcript of your interaction with Mrs. Vance. Calloway went pale. You told her health issues were not an excuse for criminals. You mocked her for asking for mercy. You said jail would teach her respect. Her voice hardened. You used this courtroom as a weapon. You sold justice to the highest bidder and destroyed lives you thought didn't matter. She lifted her gavel. There will be no mercy here. The gavel came down hard. I sentence you to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. No possibility of parole. A sound tore out of Calloway's throat raw. Animal fear. This court is adjourned. Judge Brooks said, and for the first time in his life, Lawrence Calloway was not walking out of a courtroom. He was being taken away. As the marshals moved in to escort Lawrence Calloway away, the courtroom thought it was over. It wasn't. Just before he reached the door, a man in a dark suit stepped into the aisle, clipboard in hand. His badge wasn't FBI. It wasn't D.O. It was IRS Asset Forfeiture Division. Hold one moment, the agent said calmly. The marshals paused. Calloway turned, confusion flickering across his face. What is this now? The agent flipped a page on his clipboard. Under the RICO statutes, any assets acquired through criminal activity are subject to immediate federal seizure. He reached into Calloway's pockets and removed his wallet, his platinum watch, and his wedding ring. That's mine, Calloway shouted, panic cracking his voice. Not anymore, the agent replied. He pulled a glossy photograph from the wallet and held it up for Calloway to see. A 60-foot yacht docked in the harbor, its name painted proudly on the side. The gavel. We seized the vessel this morning. The agent continued evenly. Along with your Aspen vacation home, downtown penthouse, and offshore accounts. Calloway stared at the photo as if it were a death certificate. Sophia stepped forward then, her voice quiet, almost gentle. You have nothing left. Lawrence, she said. No power, no money, no legacy. She looked him straight in the eyes. You don't even get to keep the things you used to hurt people. Calloway tried to speak, but no sound came out. The marshals turned him and led him through the door, not as a judge, not as a figure of fear, but as inmate number 894. Eleanor watched him go. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just felt finished. 6 months later, spring sunlight warmed Eleanor Vance's hands as she knelt in the soil behind her home. The rose bushes were in full bloom, deep reds, soft pinks, bright yellows. The very flowers Judge Calloway had dismissed as meaningless now filled the air with color and life. The lot next door was no longer owned by Oakwood Estates. After the scandal, the company dissolved. The city purchased the land and, in a rare act of public contrition, returned it to the neighborhood. A wooden sign hung at the entrance. The Vance Community Garden. Children laughed along the path. Neighbors tended small plots. Elderly couples sat on benches, safe in the knowledge that their homes were still theirs. Sophia walked up the path holding 2 glasses of iced tea. No Navy suit today. No badge. Just a daughter. Here you go, Mama. Eleanor took the glass and smiled. They sat together in silence for a moment, listening to bees hum through the roses. Then Eleanor spoke softly. Karma, she said. It doesn't miss. Sophia rested her head against her mother's shoulder. No, she replied, and neither do strong women. The system had tried to crush Eleanor Vance. Instead, it broke itself against her dignity and the daughter she raised. And that is how a racist judge lost everything, because he forgot one simple truth. Be careful who you step on, because you never know who they raised. If you believe justice was served, leave a comment below. Was 25 years and like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories.u. Because justice doesn't, but when it does, it remembers everything.